As many women are nowadays, especially that are in, entrepreneurs or in the work world or ambitious and just high achievers, type A or whatever you want to call us, we are over-identified with the mind at the expense of the feeling body.
Yeah.
And if I'd love for you to share with the audience the concept of the 4 functions of consciousness, because that was a game changer for me to learn how to connect with my soul, how to disidentify with my head and get more in touch with all the rest of me that wasn't online at all. That
Yes.
was, you were a huge part of bringing all of me. I mean, that's truly what holistic is, right? Living
Yes.
from all of our capacity.
Yes. Well, Jung was the one that first identified what he calls the 4 functions of consciousness. In Jungian psychology, it's often referred to as the consciousness compass. And this is really woven into the Myers-Briggs personality test, which Jung designed. And what Jung showed is that the 4 functions of consciousness are thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And we all have a dominant function and a subdominant function. So thinking dominance, are feeling subdominant. So what that means is a thinking type, which is what you were coming to me with, and which is very common in our very left brain culture. Whenever you're a thinking type, then your feeling nature gets pushed down into the unconscious. So it's always working, but for the same reasons we just talked about, people aren't often aware of what's happening in their unconscious. They just act it out. But the unconscious is more than just a memory bank. It's actually a living form of wisdom. So you have your unconscious, which is everything that you're not aware of that's happening. And you have your subconscious, which is the wisdom of the body, the cells and the wisdom of the body, which is massive. So if we're in a thinking mode and we're thinking dominant, then we tend to use logic and rationality and reason to make decisions, but we often ignore feelings. Now, just to show you how that's woven into our culture, I could take you in my library right now and pull out at least 20 business courses by the Brian Tracy's and all sorts of the business experts of the world that tell you you got to get feelings out of business or you won't make good decisions. You don't want to get emotional about anything. And so we've got this very patriarchal model, and most professors in universities, it's slightly changing now, but most of them are men, and most of them, we've got a scientific materialist viewpoint where if you can't weigh it and measure it, it doesn't exist. And I say, oh, really? Do you love your wife? And every one of them says yes. I say, okay, well, you can't weigh or measure that, but it's the most important thing in your life. So how come you're cutting the qualitative aspects of life out and calling anyone like me that thinks those are important a hippie or foo-foo? So the point I'm driving at here is when you're thinking dominant, your feelings are pushed into the background. If you're sensation dominant, your intuition is pushed into the background. If you're intuitive dominant, your sensation is pushed into the background. If you're feeling dominant, then your thinking is pushed into the background. So thinking and feeling are what Jung assigned as judgment functions. Feeling is often confused with intuition, but in the Jungian model, feeling relates to one's conscious or unconscious values. So for example, for people like you and I, the quality of the food we eat is a value that guides us. Our body's need for movement talks to us. I mean, like, I've been in this chair too long, or, this car ride is I got to pull over and go for a walk. I need some fresh air. Those are values. So if our values start to get trespassed, it creates emotions in us. The simple example I give is if you've been standing for 10 minutes in line at the supermarket to check out, and someone jumps in front of you right when it's your turn, you're likely to get really irritated. You're going to have a lot of emotions, probably anger. Why? Because your value has been trespassed. In our culture, you wait your turn. But if someone from China comes to the United States for the first time in that culture, Whoever can get on the train first wins. Whoever can get to the counter first wins. If you watch them getting on and off of trains, it's like a rugby scrum where they're just
they push you right out of the way.
Right out of the way, to trample you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you see is whenever our values get trespassed, it triggers an emotional response, which lets us know how important it is to us. A lot of emotion means it's really important. So feeling is a judgment faculty because our values are what determines the worth of something for us. Thinking tells us whether or not it means something to us. So the thinking process is about, is this meaningful to me? For example, if I said, Amy, I signed you up for a college course in, let's call it the economics of textiles. And you might say, well, Paul, I really have no interest in that. So right away, what happens is your thinking mind says, there's no meaning for that. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time studying the economics of textiles. I just buy the clothes I want and leave that to the guys that make it. So right away, there's not any sense of meaning there. So thinking is really always looking for meaning. If there's no meaning for us, our spirit will not flow.
So an emotional connection.
Well, the meaning has to connect back to the values. You see, thinking and feeling are both working on the judgment system.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, if I said to you, Amy, why is that not an exciting course for you? You would say, well, it doesn't really fit my values. I buy organic clothes. I like to buy from local people that make them by hand. I like to support the community. But that course that you've just signed me up for is an industrial course for manufacturers and hardly anything that interests me. And in fact, I don't even like to put money into that. So what you're finding is that when you look into your values and then you connect it to your thinking, that course does not make meaning because it does not align with your values.
Yeah.
So the intuitive sensation pole is our perceptual faculties. Sensation tells you what something is. If I touch a rock, it's my sensory system that says it's hard. If I stick my hand in water, my sensory system says, that's wet. If I touch a sharp knife, my sensory system tells my brain, be careful, that can cut you and hurt you. If I wear a wool sweater and I don't like that itchiness, it tells me you need to change the material or put a t-shirt on to protect yourself. So sensation's always about what something is in the physical, tangible reality, but intuition is the function that gives us what all the other functions cannot pick up. See, if you're thinking, you can't really be effectively feeling. If you're meditating, trying to access your intuition, but flies keep landing on your face, your sensory system keeps telling you what it is. There's a fly on your face and it's trying to climb up your nose. And you're like, so all of a sudden you're dropped out of that deep meditative intuitive access because your sensory system is pulling you out of that transcendent function. So the intuitive function transcends thinking, feeling, and sensation. And Jung and others describe that intuition is giving us the information that brings us into a state of wholeness because it is greater than but inclusive of thinking, feeling, and sensation. So if you're fully in a state of intuition, I'll give you an example. The famous philosopher Hindu sage Shankara was once in a debate with a student of his wife. And I don't remember specifically what the debate was. It's in the book called The Crest Jewel of Discrimination by Shankara. But the debate was very intense. And even Shankara, who is an amazing philosopher sage, this woman pushed him right to the edge of himself in this debate. So he said to her, I'm going to have to go into meditation to get the answer to the question you're posing me. And he said, I might be gone for a few days. I need you to take care of my body and just protect it. Because he was going so deep into intuition, he completely and utterly left his body behind. And, wow. And many great sages can do this. So her job was to make sure that, he could come back to a body that didn't have, insect bites or anything terrible. And so the point I'm driving at here is, here you got a sage who goes so far into intuition, he's completely disconnected from sensation, because he knows that to get to the depth of source or spirit, to get an answer to a question that deep, which she pushed him to his limit, he had to go talk to God. And to do that, he had to leave his body completely behind, or he would always be distracted by the sensations, the sounds of the people walking by, the smells of food. And he was gone for, if I remember right, 4 days before he came back into his body. So the key point is if you're to access intuition fully, you have to disconnect from sensation. To fully be present with your sensations, you cannot be intuiting what's going to happen in the world in 5 years, because you will be leaving your sensory function to do that. So what Jung showed is these things work as functional antagonists, just like yin and yang. They're complementary opposites. But what I was teaching you, and what I have to teach so many people, is that if we become overly thinking dominant, then we tend to ignore our feelings, because we're too trapped in this process of trying to make meaning through rational and logical means. And thinking's very masculine. Feelings are very feminine, and emotions are feminine. If we're very thinking oriented, we also tend to fall into the trap of being sensory oriented. So people that are very thinking oriented will oftentimes lend themselves towards sensation, because it's easier to think about something that you can hold and look at, for example. Like, this is the difference between reading a book and looking at a computer screen. I like to hold a book because I have a sensation of the author through holding the book. I have a connection to the author. Now, that's, a lot of people would think I'm old-fashioned for that.
I'm the same.
Yes. So ultimately, what Jung taught us is that to really achieve our potential as a human being, we must bring these 4 functions into balance, because to the degree your thinking and feeling are out of balance, your faculty for effective judgment is disabled. And to the degree that you're caught in sensation with a lack of intuition, your perception is limited. To the degree that you're immersed in intuition, your sensation's limited, which means you may be having a great intuitive access, but you really become somebody like that's stoned all the time, or on mushrooms all the time, where you're in another world, but you don't realize you just drove your car into the back of somebody else's car, because you're not paying attention to what your sensory system's feeding back to you about the environment.
And you're not grounded in your body and in reality. And a lot of times people like that actually ignore their body to their peril. They don't put enough priority on taking care of their body, exercise, diet, and all that. And
because, my office was in Encinitas, which is the headquarters, local headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, there's a ton of what I call bliss bunnies walking around. So you get these people that are meditating hours a day, but their bodies are falling apart, and they're not paying attention. Why? Because they have shut down the sensory information. And unfortunately, you have a lot of gurus and religious people that shun the body and tell you, you want to get rid of the body. The goal is to transcend the body. So you get a lot of these dangerous ideas. But really what Jung was saying is, you're not going to reach your potential until you access thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition equally.
Yeah.